Welcome back to the Wellbeing in Practice podcast, bringing you the latest in complementary, integrative, and functional medicine conversations. I'm Tanya Borowski, Head of Education here at Amrita, and your host. And today I have with me, I know I say this all the time, but it's true, another dear friend and colleague, Antony Haynes, who is a registered nutritionist, and also most of you as practitioners will know he is the co-founder of Nutrilink, and they're responsible for the technical and practitioner support. Now, he also very, very often presents clinically focused webinars and seminars, both through nutritional therapy institutions to postgraduates and undergraduates. And I'm sure you will agree, for anybody that has ever heard him speak, you will find anything that comes out of Antony's mouth from his brain highly invaluable. He also, if that wasn't enough, is the has two award-winning books on nutrition that were published, gosh,
20 and 20 and
20
19 years
years
ago.
ago. Yep, because I remember purchasing them just as I'd qualified myself. So one is the insulin factor and the other is the food intolerance Bible. So please do go and search for those because they still remain on my bookshelf today. So, with his many years of practice, which he has now been in private practice for over 30 years, and he has seen in excess of 18,000 clients, he is going to bring today a really unique conversation to the podcast, which is really sharing just an insight into his practical experience. And you are going to be gaining so many clinical pearls, and I hope illuminate some light bulbs in your mind as we talk through two case studies around the topic of thyroid and adrenal health. Welcome to the podcast, my friend Antony.
Thank you so much, Tony, for having me. And as I've often been in this situation, whereas I'm sure that if everyone listening could produce case histories of their own, we'd learn from you as well. So it's I appreciate it sort of from top down, but I know that we could all learn from your cases as well. But these cases, as it happens, there are actually a number of characteristics about these specific cases. First of all, yes, that we are using specific glandulas specifically, but also there's very limited supplements in both of these cases.
Great.
And the outcomes are tremendous. They really are. So and I'm well familiar with the characters. I've given them different initials than their real initials, but to disguise them, I'm going to share them, and we'll go through. And I'd love to sort of share it with you, go through it with you. Some of the slides I'll go through pretty quickly, perhaps
Okay.
at my usual pace, but also just I'd love to have your questions, and maybe yeah, which I think will be helpful for others
Okay.
to answer as well. So
So while
let's
you start sharing the
yeah.
screen, so
Yeah.
for those of you that are listening, you will get the slides. Um, Anthony, could I just ask you a
Mm,
question? What drove what year back in the day? What drove
mm.
you to look at becoming an NT, a nutritional therapist?
Yeah, well, it does go back. Been asked this question before. In 1980, when I was 15, I was playing sport with a friend who actually ended up playing cricket for England, and we did multiple sports. So we would do squash, sort of tennis, cricket. I would bowl and he would bat, and then we played hockey. And so I did lots of sports. It was a very misspent childhood. And then I said out loud, and when I had. He actually ended up running the cricket at Lords, so I had lunch with him once a few years ago, and he asked the same question. And he said, "But Ant," he said, "you said in 1980, all right, what food do you think we should eat for optimal performance?" In 1980, when I was 15, I said, "What do you think we should eat?" Now, I think the conclusion we came to was probably not quite correct. It may have served us well at the age of 15, and
Yep.
we're both extremely fit and etc. Which is basically a microwaved, because microwaves had just come out then, and
Oh,
we wouldn't have to wait for the potato to get cooked in the oven, which would take an hour. So basically, it was a microwaved baked potato with beans or cheese or tuna. So we thought it was pretty much it because of the carbs. So carbs were really
carbs
in.
and protein. I
Carbs
mean,
and protein really in, and so he reminded me that, and I was very much into nutrition, and I certainly made lots and lots of mistakes. I mean, I made probably more mistakes than I've made things correctly in my own health. But I think and also when I then did a sports science degree. I became the person in the degree who actually was the person everyone asked about nutrition. And I was getting my information from very limited sources in those days. I grew up from
Yeah.
1983 to 1987, did my sports science degree. And then you may not know, but I was sponsored by the army. I was a second lieutenant. I went to Sandhurst, and at Sandhurst again, I was the person in the platoon of 30 that people asked about nutrition. I was the one asked. Now it is true that I actually left Sandhurst before I passed out in order to become a nutritionist because I discovered that my interest in health was so great that I'd rather probably not carry a gun. But rather actually engage in perhaps carry a hockey stick instead and engage in nutrition. So in fact, it was actually my interest in nutrition which made me leave the uniform, which I think was a very good thing. Some regrets, possibly, but really just it was just, and then I found the Institute for Optimal Nutrition about a year later, and started studying. I knew as soon as I walked in that door, and it was a pretty dingy place in Jordan Place and Fulham Broadway, but as soon as I walked in, I knew in that moment that I'd be teaching.
Oh,
I knew in that moment I'd be teaching, even though that the beginning of the teaching was awful. As you know, public speaking, it was absolutely terrifying for me, and
yeah.
I could barely stand up. So it's been a long term interest. I'm 60 in 6 months' time, so it's basically 45 years of my life of a sort of a keen interest in nutrition. And I'm sure I've got some things wrong, and I've still got lots to learn, and that's the beauty of it. And I know you've been practicing a while too, but I still actually, I wonder out loud. It's a wonder. It's rhetorical. I still have the same passion and interest at supporting someone's health as I did back in the day. So I feel very blessed for that.
Oh, Anthony, I've got shivers. Yeah. So thank you for being so open and sharing that story. And I can, so was Patrick Holford actually teaching when you
Yeah,
started it?
yes, he was
Yeah.
actually
Wow.
practicing. I actually sat in on Patrick's last one-to-one consultation
Wow.
back in the Ion Clinic. So I was with Kate Neal, and Kate Neal and I did the third year together. She graduated before me, but when the third year was introduced in at Ion in 1983, 84, I was the first student in the third year of the NCDC study group there with Kate. And of course, I'm very sort of
Amazing.
vicariously proud of what she's done with C and ELM as well.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Incredible. Thank you, Anthony, for taking
Mm.
us a little bit down memory lane
Yeah.
and also emphasizing what we were talking about just before, or highlighting what we were talking about just before we came on air, that this is just a continual journey, that we never just have stopped that passion for wanting to keep learning or unlearning,
Mm.
being humble enough to unlearn what we
Yeah.
thought we knew, to be
Yes.
open to unlearning that.
Certainly. I've heard medical doctors speak about this too, but I think yes, the amount of things I've had to unlearn, it's probably not as great as the things I have learned to be true. But
Good.
there are some things, yes, fortunately, but there are many things that you think, gosh, that really was a mistake. And there are new things I'm learning now, and it's whilst it's not today for the topic, but it's also the
Sure.
sort of the absolute focus, let's say, on vitamin D. Well, maybe you know maybe through the root cause protocol and Moira Robbins' work. Maybe there are certain challenges with that, and and same with zinc. If you just focus on zinc, is that going to upset the antagonist of other minerals and so on, which
Yep.
may actually be something that we've not learned about enough, and we're actually unwittingly doing someone a disservice by recommending just take zinc, although zinc could be very useful, of course, especially since COVID, more the population are aware of the importance of zinc in
Yeah.
particular. But so there's things, and I think the beauty of the overall nutrition is that you give the body what it needs, it will do what it will do, and that's the beauty of it. So we are not the healers, the body is the healer, the client's body is the healer, and it's about facilitating that process and identifying what people need to include or exclude in order to achieve that.
I love that. Thank you. So we have two case studies to go
Mm,
through today. So can we start with the
yes,
first one, Anthony?
yes, here
So
we are.
yeah, take
Yes,
us through and I will, yeah, ask questions if I feel that they're pertinent. So please
yeah.
introduce us to your first case.
Yes, so here we go. So we got this Mrs. SW. I'm just
Yep.
gonna slide by that. So she, she has fatigue. She's slim, fatigued. She's got anxiety, and she feels detached, spaced out, not connected from the world around her. Feels a bit dizzy and woozy, and sometimes she can get woozy, and now she's had to sort of get a cab home, for example, when she's been out, and occasionally she has palpitations. a lot of her friends called her too slim, but that's the physique that she's had that all her life. So there we go. She's the mother of 4 adult children. She was one of 7. And she's a housewife, lives at home in London with her husband. So there are summary: dizziness and wooziness, fatigue, detached, spaced out, and low blood pressure as well, worry, anxiety. So because it gets that sense of it. um, and very, yeah, very an earnest lady as well, just very earnest and not quite intense, but very engaged. So when she's listening to you, she's listening to you 100%. So in spite of what goes on with her cognition, where she can't concentrate, when she's engaged in conversation about health, she's very engaged. She's never been in hospital, never been medication, and had a course of antibiotics, I think, in her life once. She visited a doctor at least 5 times to get help over addressing these symptoms over the past decade, but nothing had been successful from a medical perspective. So she'd been brought up in a world where if you've got something wrong, you do go to the doctor. So she
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, although she was very much into natural health, the first port of call with these things is, yes, I go and see the doctor. The 2 medications she had been prescribed made her feel worse, so she stopped them. She had investigations into her health, and you can begin to see that she'd been through a bit of the matrix. Because as soon as you have something wrong with your heart or something, you get, and I think it may or may not be an appropriate thing. It's a question of knowing when to say no or when's not appropriate. But you've got to get the tests to show what's wrong, what's wrong. So it went through tests, and so she was put on a beta blocker, but she felt
Wow.
such an exaggerated sense of her symptoms that she discontinued it. And I actually heard that last week from a client as well, put on a beta blocker, and it's like that just it made everything worse.
Gosh.
At the same time, it can be fantastically useful if someone's got an atrial fibrillation or more palpitations. It can be very useful, of course. So she recovered, and on similar occasions, she'd been prescribed an anxiolytic, but that resulted in similar sensations. So it's a logical thing. But when you've got a medical toolbox, what are you going to use? You can use a beta blocker or an anti-anxiety
Absolutely.
drug, and you've got nothing else to use. So it may be that the environment she was in, she was never going to get an answer effectively, I from their medical perspective. So there was no diagnosis ascribed to her range of symptoms, but and that increased her anxiety and worry because her, like many others, they want to know what's wrong. What's the diagnosis, doc? And I've also had many chronic complex cases where no one's been able to pin down what they've got. And I've heard it from the mouths of clients. I mean, many clients saying, if I had a cancer or if I had a
Mm.
specific disease, no matter how honest it is, I would be better off because I'd have certainty about what I've had. And then other people would know that I could say, I've got X, Y, Z, and it'd be so much better for me than this syndrome of
Yeah.
the scenario.
Yes, I hear this a lot too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's an
Yeah.
interesting culture in which so I'd rather not have a diagnosis, but of course I could have a whole bunch of symptoms that could be inexplicable. It's the sort of uncertainty factor.
Yes. Yeah,
She couldn't
absolutely.
she couldn't tell her friends what was wrong, so she bottled it up inside, and that certainly affected the way she led her life. So she would pace herself and make sure, and she'd also make sure that if they were going to lunch somewhere, that she was near a main road where a cab could be, so she'd get a cab to come home.
Oh, bless her.
I know. So she had a high quality of life. She wanted for nothing, and she's quite well off in that sense. So she's very, very grateful for that, and so didn't actually have anything to worry about, but she was anxious and worried nonetheless. So she'd engaged with a psychotherapist to address that over 3 months, but really nothing really arose from that. She ate well, slept well, and required about 9 hours. So she had relatively high sleep need. Her blood pressure was low, but was never identified as playing a role in her anxiety or sensations. You think with a low blood flow to her brain that might contribute to dizziness and wooziness. No one had yet to investigate any biochemical or biological contributors to her anxiety. And of course, why would they? Within the medical sphere, there's pathology assessment. It's not looking at, if you like, a functional assessment of neurotransmitters, for example, or indeed her gut microbiome, which could influence that. Her blood pressure was low, 84 over 48. That's low. If I had
Okay,
that
that's
right
low.
now, I think I'd have to lie down.
Yeah.
Um, and her pulse was low. Interestingly, the pulse was low too. Sometimes I have clients with low blood pressure and the pulse is high to compensate for that, but she had a low pulse as well. I double checked the figures, and they were consistent. And basically, a good day was 90 over 60 on blood pressure, so definitely low. But she was also very slim, so her perhaps ideal blood pressure would be lower than 115 over 75, for example. So, as time passed from 15 years ago to the current day, she'd experienced increasing symptoms. So, 15 years of symptoms and basically getting worse. She'd experienced continuous anxiety about 2 years ago, whereas the palpitations only first occurred about 18 months ago. She's seen doctors and specialists because she could afford that, private healthcare, but nothing wrong. and that's also something that comes up with lots of clients. I mean, lots of clients is then they did the blood test and there was nothing wrong with me. And then I say, well, how many analytes did you have measured? And they say, well, I had the hematology biochemistry, or they show me,
Yeah.
and then they're not anemic. And I say, well, you got 30 markers there, and they're all normal. Cholesterol, liver function test, which of course is not really a liver function test at all. And I then explained to them, after speaking to the doctor's laboratory, which is one of the largest labs in Europe, I asked them how many analytes can be assessed in a human being. And you may or may not know this figure, Tanya,
I
but
don't know. No.
55,000.
Good Lord.
So there are 55,000, and now of course some of those are they're extreme sort of scenarios of testing which we'd never engage normally. But so I said, you've had 30 measured out of 55,000 and told there's nothing wrong. Of course, if a test is showing nothing wrong, it was the wrong test to do, essentially.
Can
So
I
they all.
just
Mm,
interject with, because I know people will ask, will have picked up on the phrase, you say, when you said a liver function test is not a liver function test at all. Can
yeah.
you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. The liver has, it's been estimated to have 500 individual sort of biochemical functions a day. I don't know what they are, but I know there are various different domains for it. And so what the liver function test looks for, looks for ALT, AST,
Yep.
LDH, gamma GT. So it's looking for liver enzymes, basically, which reflect a degree of biliary issues, biliary congestion, and oxidative stress. And it's sort of more of a sort of pathogenic marker and possibly an indicator of a development of fatty liver, let's say,
Yep.
which could be useful. So that's what the liver function test. But if you wanted to really do a liver function test, there'd be an awful lot more analytes that reflect the different major components of what the liver does. And I think there are 6 major categories. I'm sure I could be corrected, but there's bile production and flow, there's detoxification, there's fat digestion, emulsification, there's protein manufacture, it's an immune organ, and detoxification. So we've got
Yep.
6 major categories, of which we're maybe more familiar with some than others. All of us on this call may be familiar with the 8 major phase 2 detox pathways. We may know a number of the 58 phase 1 pathways as well. But effectively, to have an assessment of the function of the liver, we'd have to assess at least some markers for those 6 categories within the liver. And
Love
the
it.
standard tests, ALT, AST, don't do that, essentially.
No, love it. Thank
So,
you.
thank you for asking. So she said, yeah, it's all psychological, and so that made her clam up because that just didn't really cut it. So she's an omnivore, so not a vegetarian, which is I'm grateful for because I've met clients like that who've been vegetarian and it hasn't helped. She rarely eats red meat, however, but eats white meats, regularly has fish, has some cheese, and has a high plant food diet. So basically, it's kind of more, I guess, towards a Mediterranean style diet, but it's whole fresh food, not ultra processed food. She rarely drinks alcohol, and but when I looked at her diet, as I do, very carefully, I've always got my eye out for protein, and she wasn't having enough. And I proposed that she could do with more protein to help her energy and so many other functions in the body. I find it very, very common for individuals not to have enough protein, and I have spent quite some time researching the world's researchers on protein needs and discovered the vast majority of people need probably twice the recommended daily allowance, or the whatever it is, which is basically set about zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram is the RDA, but most people need up to double that typically, in
Yep,
my
that makes
experience.
sense. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if you've found that to be the case too in your experience.
I have, and actually, very much this age group, this cohort of women is definitely an area is as you know, I sort of love and
Mm,
specialize in women's health,
yeah.
um, and this sort of age group is very, very popular. There are sort of lots of books around the fact
Mm,
that women should sort of fast and intermittent fast, and I'm not anti a level of fasting, but what tends to happen, especially with this age group, is that what goes is also is they're just not eating enough protein.
yes.
So they become very carb phobic, and they're just not taking in enough, and they're not taking in enough protein, and
Mm,
that is a
yeah.
real issue for well, just for overall health.
Yes, completely with you on that. If they weren't having enough protein in 3 meals, how are they going to do it in two anyway?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So on the health questionnaires that I use 2 questionnaires still. I use the ION one, which I find useful. I also used Dick and Weatherby's one, which I've used for over 24 years. And I just find them useful because actually what's fascinating with the two questionnaires, although I have yet to have the technical skills to blend them into one questionnaire that is my own, as it were, but I find that you can have someone appearing to have a balanced blood sugar from the symptoms in one questionnaire, but have very imbalanced on the other one because they're asking the questions or the symptoms in a different way. And I really do appreciate the both. And I apologize to my clients sort of regularly saying, look, sorry for the two questionnaires, but do fill them out quickly. But it's fascinating to see sometimes the contrast and the way they've asked the questions. So on these sections to do with the adrenals and the thyroid in particular, given the case history we're talking about, Mrs. SW, it was suggesting of underfunctioning thyroid and thyroid and adrenal hormones. So that makes sense from the case history. She told me she had a blood test 18 months ago and it was all normal. We've heard that before, but it did include a thyroid function. My understanding that it was a TSH that was in the normal range, but in my experience, that doesn't automatically mean that T4 and T3 were optimal levels. So we know that TSH is influenced by many things and not
Hmm.
just the level of T3 or T4, and that's part of the issue. And furthermore, we also know that serum levels of thyroid hormone don't reflect what's going on inside the cell. Now, I've actually presented, you may not know this, I presented more webinars and lectures on thyroid health than any other subject in my career. And I did it on purpose because it is the biggest single issue. I was asked, what's the biggest single issue that you'd see in clinical practice? And I basically boiled it down to, well, fatigue, sure, bloating, yes, but actually fundamentally thyroid hormone issues in the large number of females that I have as
Yep.
clients. Um, and it's not necessarily a conspiracy theory, which is a very dismissive way of saying it, but why on earth hasn't there been developed a methodology of assessing intracellular levels of thyroid hormone? I asked you that question, Tanya.
No, no. Well, I actually, I've posed a very similar question myself. Yeah,
Mm.
it's
So, because the intracellular levels don't reflect. Now, sure that if you have regular tests on the thyroid, I think that the pattern, you can see a pattern. I think it's very useful. But of course, that means in a blood draws regularly. But so often I find my clients have been told there's nothing wrong, nothing wrong. When you do have primary hypothyroidism, we'll treat you. And it's
yeah,
like the TSH level is 4, and they says no, it's completely fine. Because that's
yeah,
within the range, not up to 4.5. So we know that there's an issue with thyroid testing anyway because the serum levels don't reflect the intracellular levels, and furthermore, other factors influence these markers, especially TSH. And so you can have a low TSH and low T4, and you think, well, your thyroid's fine, but in fact, there's something else influencing TSH, etc. And it is complicated, but we know the thyroid is the yellow canary of glands and indeed hormones. It's the thing most likely to be negatively affected by life EMFs, stress, oxidative stress, inflammation, and so on and so on. So I thought, let's do an adrenal test to see where your cortisol levels are, because it strikes me that Mrs. SW might have an abnormal level. So let's get some evidence for that. So I suggested we do, and also do a comprehensive thyroid test as opposed to just TSH. However, she said, no, I want help right now. We've got a trip on the Mediterranean on their yacht. Sounds very grand, but it's actually a 33-foot yacht, which requires quite a lot of human labor and effort.
okay,
So it's not a motorized thing. It's actually that husband's a sailor and her children are able to sail. So it's actually quite a tough. And I've been in a yacht across the seas that size, and it's quite challenging. So she had never been able to go before because she just was unable to withstand the rigors of a sailing boat on the wind. And the trip was a week away, so she said, "Do something now. I can't be doing the tests, etc." So if I could help her to feel strong enough for the trip, this would mean that that would be her strong wish. So give this to me now, Antony. So she agreed she'd do the test on her return. How often have we heard that from clients? Uh, I explained that it may very well not
so
be possible to bring about any significant change in a short period of time. And then she basically had to fly to Italy instead of taking the boat with the family, which is again a pretty tough ask, to be honest, on a 33-foot Sigma yacht. So in this way, circumstance led to no lab evidence of her adrenal status or thyroid hormone status. I prepared some simple and limited recommendations for her, which I'll share with you in a moment. She ordered the supplements immediately after leaving the clinic room, and she received them the next day. And we agreed that she would contact me later and let me know how she was. Did she fly to Italy, or did she get on the boat? So she let me know.
okay,
In terms of a diet, I recommend she consume protein each food, providing 20 grams of high biological value protein. I explained what that meant. And it doesn't mean to say you eat a packet of almonds to get your 20 grams of protein.
yep,
I did explain to her the rate limiting amino acids, and also how misleading some of those advertising on packets of things. Of course, she didn't really eat packet food, but how, having vegetables containing a certain amount of protein, it didn't translate into making body proteins or helping hormones or neurotransmitters, because you need all the essential amino acids for that. And so she was definitely not understanding that at first, but hopefully I did explain it to her. And I explained how the protein would help her adrenals and thyroid. And in my experience, and you can probably back this up, that the more stress, the more you need resilience, the more stress you're under, the more you need protein,
Yes.
essentially. I recommend she add Himalayan salt to all the water she drank to maintain the blood pressure rather than sodium chloride.
Yep.
I recommend three supplements: licorice solid extract, which is a glycerin
Lovely.
with licorice, which actually has been discontinued by allergy research. And what licorice does, licorice inhibits an enzyme that actually breaks down cortisol. So basically, it's 11 beta steroid
HSV.
dehydrogenase
Yeah.
that it inhibits. And so it can also raise blood pressure, which I thought could be a bit of a win for her as well.
I
Um,
remember that product. It was in a little pot.
Yes, it was, and a little pot, and obviously very licoricey, and it would spill, and difficult to keep it, but it was also delicious, and I've had that too. So half a teaspoon at breakfast and lunchtime, and I recommended an adrenal natural glandular at three different times in the day. As you can see, breakfast, lunch, and at 5 p.m. And the GTA Forte, which I don't understand why the name is that, but it's a thyroid glandular, and it contains cofactor nutrients that support the thyroid gland manufacture as well. So one at breakfast, one at lunch. So I
Okay.
recommended glandulars and possibly one of the most powerful plant extracts, which is as close to perhaps a drug-like effect of any supplement, which is licorice. I mean, it really does have very potent effects. At whatever cortisol you have around, it keeps it around for longer, a couple of
Yep.
hours. So 13 days later, I get a text message from Mrs. SW, who did not have access to a computer while she was on holiday in Italy. She succeeded by traveling by boat, which is again, it wasn't a luxury yacht. It's quite a tough ride all the way to Italy without having to be dropped off. So on previous occasions, she started off on the boat and had to be dropped off on the mainland, and then she'd somehow fly or get the train to the final destination where the rest of the family were. But she made the whole trip, which is amazing. The family were amazed at her sudden improved health because they're used to her always pacing herself in the day, etc., and never overextending herself. And she had not experienced any of her symptoms except at the end of a hard day on the boat. She was recovered in the morning time after sleeping well on the boat. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, it's just, I had no expectation this would happen.
Amazing.
She managed a 6 day trip. Apparently, that's how long it takes to sail from Portsmouth or Southampton to Capri or wherever they're going. Um, so a few weeks later, we had a brief telephone appointment from Italy on the day before she was due to head back to the UK. Quite why we didn't wait, I don't know. She was in such good spirits, and she kept telling me over the phone what a transformation there'd been. And when could her husband, at least one of her children, come to see me?
Oh,
You may have been there too. It's very sweet. She had even walked up the incredibly long stairs, and I've actually then since looked this up on
no.
geo maps. Um, the long stairs from the sea to the top of the coast of the island of Capri. You can actually look at it, and it's actually a really steep climb from the sea to get up onto the island. So, and she managed to walk that as well, which is really outstanding. She had a new lease of life, and we agreed to meet in August, effectively. When it came to August, she had gone on another trip, so only met in September. So she had energy, she could travel. She reported she was having some reappearance of symptoms, fatigue
Mm.
and spaciness, which brought her to tears, thinking that I thought I'd recovered and now I haven't. And we may have seen this before. So you get a win, and then it then declines, and there's
Yeah.
an emotional reaction to that naturally enough. And so I looked not to set myself up for a fall, and to give an indication that it's rarely
No.
a straight line. And if you do reach there, sometimes there can be ebbs and flows. So just to set the scene for people. It was very emotional for her. I checked she was eating as I directed, and she was adding salt to her water. And so she basically stuck to the plan and had done very well, except things were just coming back. I decided to make a few subtle changes to the supplements, and I've asked her to come back to me in 4 or 5 days, because she seemed to be a quick responder. Not everyone's a quick responder, and that's another conversation perhaps.
Yeah.
I added a low dose but active form B vitamin formula, which you may be familiar with when you see the
Yep.
name. And I found it to be very effective for the nervous system because the B vitamins really help with methylation and the metabolism of neurotransmitters for dopamine, noradrenaline, and so on. For the dopamine beta hydroxylase, for example, which requires B6. I
I
said,
think that's very important that it's a low dose,
yeah,
because I think we've moved again sort of over the last decade, we've sort of really moved into this sort of bigger is better and more is better.
Mm,
And B vitamins are very, you take high doses or even medium-sized doses of B vitamin, they can make you feel really nauseous,
yes.
because
Because
they
I think they upregulate the
regulate
phase one
liver. Yeah,
enzymes in
yeah,
particular. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I met so many people can't tolerate a multi, which has got like 25 to
Yes.
50 milligrams of B complexes. So oh, when I take supplements, I feel ill. And so, well, what supplements are those? So you investigate, you discover actually it was the B complex
Yep.
that often did that. So this is and actually it has been one of my favored, and also a supplement's only favorite if it does well with clients. It's the only reason. So I asked her to stop the licorice, and I exchanged the previous adrenal glandular for a biotics one, which is the whole adrenal glandular, which is a neonatal form and a sort of milligram per milligram, bang for your buck. It's a stronger form. So here's what
Right.
the program looked like. So it's basically an adrenal glandular with the GTA forte, and instead of the licorice, I recommend this low dose B vitamin, which has got a strange name, but Bio3BG. I have discovered why it's called that, but it's probably not worth explaining it right now. But the basically it's the sort of the RDA of B vitamins, but four of the B vitamins in there: the B1, the B2, the the B12 and the B6 are all in
B6.
their
Yep.
active forms. And I recommend three with each meal. They're very small pills. They're actually kind of the size, almost the size of a Tic Tac in a circular
Yeah, they're tiny.
fashion. And so I recommend three with each meal. I find it very effective for people with low blood pressure and low blood sugar disposition to stabilize. I've got an air diagram stabilizing blood sugar and stabilizing energy, and also so really helping without upregulating phase one liver enzymes, which is what leads to nausea.
Yep.
So thank
That
you for
makes
highlighting
complete
that.
sense.
And so I've used this as it happens 9 per day. I've recommended more than that on occasion, but it's quite rare. But 9 per day is probably the upper end of normal, and it does make one's pee go yellow. And always let your clients know that's a normal thing, of course. Um, yeah, back in the day, of course, you get these strange phone calls about yellow pee and having to go to A&E because their pee's so bright fluorescent yellow. Something must be desperately wrong. Um, um, After 4 days, she had started the program. She texted me, and we had a telephone appointment that evening. Um, she told me how she completely recovered all her energy and head was clear, no wooziness at all. So it's amazing how she's clearly, yeah, very, very responsive to nutritional change, and she's very sensitive. And so again, lower doses make sense. She was relieved, and we agreed to have another telephone appointment in a week's time to ensure she's feeling better. So she wanted the reassurance we're going to have those appointments in the near future, rather than saying I'll be fine, see you in 6 weeks. Um, so we spoke in a week's time, and she'd been consistently well, just as she'd been while she was on holiday in Italy in the Mediterranean. And the boat trips, they're pretty rough, those boat trips. So I'm not having been on yachts. It's not much fun. So I actually can't imagine her on the boat, to be honest. She repeated to me how an awe her family had been to see her in this kind of form, given the previous 2 years in particular, but a withdrawal from so many activities that she'd normally engaged in. So basically, she'd self-censored to make sure that she was okay. In October, so months go by, we met for the third time in person, although we had quite a lot of communication, as you can tell. And she was back in a good state of health with good mental focus, good vision, and no spaciness at all. We measured her blood pressure. Whoa, record 98/64,
Wow. That's
which is
good.
as high as she could recall. The pulse was 59 as well. So it's fascinating. Her weight remained the same, and it's the same very slim physique. And I think lots of her friends were jealous, but that's simply no matter what she ate, was she overate or underate, which she didn't really do much of, she stayed the same anyway. She just had that sort of genetic disposition. I think sometimes it really is genetic.
Yeah.
I recommend she continue with the existing supplements and then meet in December before she travelled again. So they would go to another country in December. She was thrilled and delighted to be able to engage in her charity work and in events with her husbands and family, and have to get up and go to do the things she wanted. So that was so that it's actually it's a rare case now, but it's a very very few remedies: adrenal glandular, thyroid glandular, and then those B vitamins. It struck me for probably 15 years she had a degree of hypothyroidism and a degree of hypoadrenalism, if that's the term, and a degree of malnourishment in the sense that she wasn't ever going to be able to eat enough to support her body with the therapeutic level of nutrients it required. She because she's so sensitive and she cared deeply about her family, so really her family, she worried about the family and then worried about her health, and so she was a stressed someone who she didn't need to be stressed, but she certainly was. So it's a really fantastic outcome, but also the fact we use so few remedies
I love that.
gives me the feedback about what was going on wrong because we
And
didn't get we
also,
didn't get the test done.
yeah. And also, explaining to her what quality protein was, what and why she needed that, because I think that's part of the therapeutic relationship, isn't it? And so as clinicians, actually understanding what the it's all very well to, let's use liver function as an example. It's all very well as a practitioner to ask to view those, and in and yes, okay, they may well all be in range, but then you marry that to her symptoms, and this is absolutely then the art of nutritional therapy, and be able to explain to her, you're very lean, you're definitely displaying signs of erratic blood sugar, you're not able to keep your blood sugar stable as you
Mm.
show, and
Yes.
actually be able to explain what these amino acids do and the many, many uses of these, to be able to support her particular case history is really important, because then I'm sure that there were times when she was away that those words came back to her as to, why is Anthony asking me to do this? Why is it important that I actually have protein with this meal at lunchtime? Can I not? And then, because something will have resonated with her, and that's the joy of that sort of therapeutic, building that therapeutic relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I did explain to her, I discovered this from 1996. I seem to remember the discovered that a biological value above a certain number, and I think you go above 0.76, and then you leave tofu behind, as it were. So it's animal proteins only from 0.77 onwards of biological value. But the biological value, the higher it is, the more able it is to balance your blood sugar.
Heard it right here.
So,
Only Anthony and Alex Vasquez are able to recall when they read data to the
well,
month and to the year.
yeah, I'm probably forgetting things. But the so is this so actually that helps me to understand. Okay, it is the high biological value that actually stabilizes blood sugar as opposed to protein. Which what is a protein becomes meaningless because actually it is the and they've got various different terms for it now in terms of the digestibility factor for amino acids and so on. So, but basically, I would still refer to it as biological value.
Love
Um,
it.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you, Anthony.
Mm,
Okay. So I think actually that we've gone for nearly an hour. I
mm,
think that actually that is a lot of information for people to hear in one podcast. And
sure.
we'll also share the video. God, I sound like I am in the 80s. So we'll put that onto onto YouTube so you guys can watch it as well. Um, and and we can ask you back to do another interview sort of in 2025 to go through another case history.
Mm.
Would
Yeah, very good. I think one last point to state about the sort of the if you saw this lady walk into the room,
Yeah.
okay, so she's petite, slim, and nervous system is and so I know that the various different ways of describing it from biotyping and
Yeah,
body
yeah, yeah,
typing,
yeah.
but those individuals are especially with low blood pressure are more likely to need glandular support than they are
Ah,
necessary. So this is important compared to herbal support. So that's what I have discovered. And so herbs are brilliant, and I'm a huge,
so
obviously
interesting.
nature is fantastic, and there's just a multiplicity of herbs, and obviously they have an absolute place for thousands of years of use. At the same time, glandulars have been used for thousands of years too. Is that the glandulars provide peptides for oomph, which is a very lay term, but I think it's UMPH or oomph, and you can see well someone needs they actually need more actually organ support because they haven't got it, and that's where the glandulars come in real handy. So there are certain
That's
types.
so
Whereas
interesting.
let's say that she was twice the weight, she was struggling with weight, she was overweight and had similar symptoms, but she wouldn't maybe blood pressure being more normal. Then the glandulars are less likely to be in relevance. So what I see is it's sort of it's underweight, underfunctioning, under par. That's where the glandulars particularly have a value.
There's a just clinical pearl right there. That's really interesting,
So
and
almost
actually
like you
and
could
not surprising.
see someone walk in the room, and you go,
Yep,
I mean, without making judgment call and holding on to it.
of course.
I think possibilities arise when I see that. And I've long learned to let go of judgments because if I make a judgment too early, then I discover I might have to backpedal, and think, oh God, I wish I had made that decision in my mind without listening to all the data first. So I would sort of it goes in the pot of possibility
Love
when if
that.
I see someone with that physique.
I love that. And would that sort of stand true to when I'm teaching other practitioners? I do also try and, I guess, give them the authority and to trust in their own judgment as well. So you talked about your we all have our favorite sort of intake questionnaires, and we can start to glean hypotheses
Mm.
about what areas might need support, but avoiding the temptation to even think about what your support is going to be until you've had that first consultation, and so you can start to draw, even just write them on a piece of paper.
Yes.
I know
Yes.
you and
I
I are
do the
very
same
old
thing. Yeah.
school,
Mm.
but actually don't spend hours writing up a treatment plan,
Oh,
thinking about just don't do it, because
no.
you're creating a
Yeah.
thought process that you then won't be able to remove.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, completely. So, in fact, so actually, when I start the consultation to share this with you, yes, it's a mind map of possibilities. So I call it the pot of possibilities, but it's a mind map of
Yeah,
possibilities. And actually, when I start the consultation with somebody, having read all the information, in fact, the two questionnaires and the health history often can lead to 500 bits of data about someone. 500 bits of data, 500 signs and symptoms.
yeah,
And bits of data about their health history as they give me their life history in bullet point format in advance. That's an awful lot. And so I start literally by and I actually do this physically. I go, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I've got ideas. I just simply don't know what to do. Rather than having a fixed, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, and this
yeah,
gets in the way. So actually, I literally metaphorically and literally clear the desk and say, right, here you are. I've had this, got the conversation with you. Take me through a typical day. Because
yeah,
that isn't always asked for in the questionnaires. And you discover that typical day is like, oh, I got the wrong end of the stick there.
exactly.
I mean, tell me. So I agree. I think having judgment calls and sticking to them is very energy consuming and also misleading.
I love that.
Mm.
And one final question.
Mm.
Years ago, remember Anthony, this was my mentor, and I used to
Oh, you
come up to
did.
London and sit in a clinic with and listen to all of his consultations. And he was a machine. I think he used to see, in those
Oh,
days, was it 9 patients in a day?
it could have been 8 or 9, yes, in a row.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yes, 9 hours.
no,
Mm.
no. So I was sat there very duly, sort of at the back
I
in the
remember now.
chair, in
Mm.
awe of Anthony. Anyway, and do you still have a piece of paper and carbon paper underneath? Do you still do that? Or have you, have
I
you
did.
moved on to something a little bit more technical?
I did do until the day I stopped seeing clients in the beginning of the first lockdowns when I couldn't see clients
Wow.
anymore in London.
Okay.
So I did do, yes, carbon paper, and it saved a lot of time. And I've got the
I
exact
know.
copy.
I know.
Um, yeah,
I know.
yes, I did use carbon paper, and it's sort of over there in my chair. But I'm actually now only operating on Zoom, and I actually write reports now. So it's more time consuming, different way, quite satisfying in a way to be able to explain things in a bigger paragraph. It is
Yeah,
true. But yes, I have used carbon paper. It is true. So yeah,
it is. There you go.
I remember.
Anyway,
I remember you being there now. I'd actually temporarily forgotten that. You see, I do forget lots of things.
how could you?
Mm.
Yes. Anthony,
Okay.
always such a delight to talk with you. An amazing case study. Thank you so much. You are the, such a hero of our industry, and please don't ever leave. You bring so much joy and energy to our industry, and it is such an honor to be still sort of working with you. Thank you so much for
Well,
coming on the podcast.
no, right back at you. But thank you so much. And yes, I've no plans on retirement yet. That's
Good.
for sure.
Good.
Thank you so much for having me today.
You're welcome.